Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books off the shelf, blow the dust off them, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today we've got Tony Pasculi.
Thanks, Tom.
And what are we doing today?
Today we're doing Camouflage by Joe Haldeman. Haldeman is a pretty well-respected science fiction writer, but mostly people know him for The Forever War, which is a book that came to some prominence right around the same time as Starship Troopers, which we talked about recently, because of its resonance with the Vietnam War. But, I like it, but it's not my favorite. It is my favorite Haldeman. Actually, this isn't even my favorite Haldeman. This is my favorite old Haldeman that qualifies. This is just barely under my artificial threshold of 20 years ago. This was published 20 years ago.
Wow, so this is probably the most contemporary book we've had on the show so far.
Could be, yeah.
All right.
And I think it feels like it too. Yeah.
So I'd say so. So, of course, we have to start off with this. Why is this a favorite?
It's funny. It's not funny. It's not a funny book. It's unusual that it is a favorite, and there's something about the tone in which this is written, which just I find immediately engaging. I just want to read more. That's something that Haldeman does really well, especially with his later Mars trilogy. I just connect with it, and I'm into it regardless of the plot or the characters or anything else. The characterization, I'm going to say, is pretty thin, especially in the human characters. So it's obviously not that. And the plot, you probably have more to say about this, having encountered it for the first time, is also underwhelming. Yeah. I'll be curious to get your take on that.
Okay, fair enough.
But what does make it my favorite is the sort of main character, which is this alien, and the way they construct their life in a sort of deliberate fashion. And to me, it's very reminiscent of role-playing games. In fact, it's very reminiscent of a particular role-playing game that I've actually never played. Are you familiar with Traveler?
I am. Yeah.
Have you played it?
Yes, many weekends and late nights and holidays given up to Traveler.
I have never played it. But when I was about 12 years old, I found the first rule book just on the side of the road. I don't know how it got there. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what a role-playing game was. And I picked this rule book for Traveler up, and it was all about how you build your characters. Not like D&D, where you just roll 6 stats. You have to progress them through a whole system, and your character might die while you're building him.
Your character can die while you're generating it in Traveler, which I think makes it unique amongst role-playing games. I never came across another one where you might get partway through a character generation and be forced to crumple up the sheet and start over.
So this I found so fascinating, and it's kind of a shame that I've never had an opportunity to play this game, but I was just obsessed with this rule book, and I had no idea what it was. I didn't really understand that it was a game, and I didn't have access to the second 2 books because the internet wasn't a thing, and I couldn't just go out and find them. And reading this book reminds me of that experience, of this creature creating its life very deliberately, false starts and weird turns and progressing towards something, not clear what that was. To me, it really feels like a RPG come to life almost, although not in any traditional RPG that we would.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is certainly an element. I hadn't framed it that way, but yeah, I can see where you would go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it's a favorite. I just find it really, really fun, that aspect of it. Yeah. But beyond that, it's certainly, I think, not problematic. That's not the right word. That implies a moral condemnation. It's certainly unsatisfying in some other elements. Yeah.
This did a lot of both hitting and missing for me.
Yeah.
It was kind of a shotgun. There were definitely things about it I really enjoyed and appreciated, and there were things about it that I was just like, And it's interesting. We were talking about this just earlier. So this is 20 years old, which I think is certainly the most contemporary book that we've done. And it's set, at least towards the end, in 2021, right?
Yeah.
I think is where the book wraps up. So some of the predictions about what Earth technology would be capable of and would be commonplace were a bit off base.
Yeah.
And there are a few specific ones I might hit on. But it was hard for me to remember as I'm reading this thing, and parts of it are set in Hawaii, where we're located here, and they're talking about things going on in Hawaii. It's like that's not a thing.
That's not a thing.
That's not how the airport works here. No, it's like watching the Godzilla movie. It's like, where is this Honolulu International Airport? It has nothing in common with our Honolulu International Airport. But you set that sort of thing aside, and move on. All right.
So,
where would you like to start?
I'm curious what you thought of the story.
Again, there are hits and misses in this. So I love the fact that we have something that's been on Earth for give or take 1 million years. It landed, it left its ride deep in the ocean, and then 1 million years of sediment and coral have accumulated on top of it, which... Does coral grow at the bottom of the Marianas Trench? I don't think so. Coral grows.
No.
I think coral is photodependent.
Yeah.
And I don't think it grows past, I don't know how deep sunlight goes down, but certainly not over a mile.
The only stuff you get at that depth is stuff that feeds on thermal vents and stuff that can go down and come back up.
Right.
Yeah.
So they repeatedly talk about the fact that it's under 1 million years worth of coral. Okay, but moving past that. Yeah. So this thing spends 1 million years on Earth. The vast majority of it apparently is a great white shark, and that's pretty cool. And then at some point in the 1930s, it gets curious enough to duplicate a human being. And this process was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Right. So it grabs a human being, it kills it, it does a rough autopsy, and then reconfigures itself. And it's cool. It can reconfigure itself into literally anything. Animal, vegetable, mineral. I suppose it could do a gas. We don't ever explore that. But we do inorganics. In fact, it may be inorganic. Based on lab tests that happen later. And it figures out how to make itself move around and whatnot. And eventually it figures out humans are a social race and finds a way to get itself taken care of by a wealthy family. Mm-hmm. So far, so good. And all it's capable of doing is repetition. It can repeat anything, and it repeat it with phenomenal accuracy, but that's all it's capable of. What gives it the spark of improvisation? Sex. The one body, the one that it killed and autopsied, it did such a good job that eventually an attractive young woman takes hold of the attractive young alien's member, and all of a sudden there's a lightning bolt inside it because it did all the wiring just right. And now not only is it capable of repetition, but now it's capable of improvisation. And that marks the moment when it starts to be a sentient human thing.
So that's... All right. So one of the things we're going to run to again and again and again, reading science fiction classics, is the obsession of science fiction authors with sex, who are mostly men who I imagine didn't get laid nearly as much as they wanted to.
Yep.
And so they're always imagining, like Heinlein with his obsession with group sex, incest. We're going to come across in a future book some weird sexual practices. And this, so on the one hand, it's kind of cringe, but on the other hand, I think there's something genuine there in that I think an intelligence has to be embodied to be connected with the world. I think there's another obsession of science fiction authors is that, oh my God, if only we could divorce ourselves from these clunky shells and free ourselves up for pure abstract thought. I think when any experiments along those lines have actually been tried, people quickly go insane. You need to be embodied. You need to connect. And I think sex is one of those very, very powerful connections. It's a social connection. It's a physical connection. There's a great deal of pleasure there. It evolved for a reason. It's the thing that keeps the human race alive. So I find credibility there. It's just the couching of it that's a little bit...
No, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-sex in any way, shape, or form.
Of course,
But it's just... Like you said, this is a trope that
yes.
Science fiction authors really dwell on. And in this book, sex is an important part of this book several times over. But again, just the way that whole thing is set up, it's had exploratory surgery on one human. it's spent a bit of time waddling around in human form, learning to repeat sounds and to walk like it's not a sailor, which I thought was a charming touch, and stuff like that. But then again, that magic bullet that actually lets the sentient being act like a sentient human is sex. And then it gets it terribly wrong the second time.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then, like you said, watching this thing evolve is kind of fun, and watching it plan its career paths and figure out what it's interested in learning and then reinvent itself. And he spends a lot of time, especially when you get into the 20th century, talking about the difficulties the creature has in reinventing itself.
As the world gets more connected and it gets harder and harder to maintain a sense of anonymity. Yeah.
Yep, it does. And then we meet the other one.
Yeah.
And, it's late in the book when we get introduced. So this creature, the focus of the story, he calls the changeling. And then we meet the chameleon.
Yes.
And the chameleon is a human form, right? And it has been around as long as there have been human forms. We're given reason to think that it probably started out in the Neanderthal period and came up from there. It can only be human form and only male, but it can change its appearance more or less instantly. And it's a nasty creature.
Yes, it is.
The changeling is just kind of trying to feel its way. It's lost. It doesn't know it's an alien. It's forgotten it's an alien, so it's trying to find its way through the world, and that's kind of charming. And early on, when they first found the thing in the trench, I made a note to myself. I predict that the alien is going to end up being one of the scientists. I was wrong. Well, I was
only sort
close
of
to
wrong.
right.
Yeah.
I was only sort of wrong. But I mean, okay, so obviously these two were going to collide, and obviously they're going to collide at that point. And I've dropped to the complete end of the novel. That was unsatisfying to me.
The ending was unsatisfying. So before we get to the unsatisfying ending, there's some other unsatisfying stuff that happens along the way.
Okay.
And one, as you mentioned, is the second alien, the chameleon, gets introduced very late in the book. And so when I went to grad school, we had a phrase sort of bopping around among the student body for creative writing of you were allowed one dancing taco per book. Yeah.
You've mentioned that before.
Yeah. So if you're going to have a dancing taco, you introduce it early, and that's it. You're done. So if you're going to have two weird shape-shifting aliens, they should be connected in some way, and you should bring them in together, unless the other one is like just maybe a fragment of the first one, which could happen. I think something you didn't mention is that the alien we're dealing here with, the changeling, is only a fragment of its total self. Most of it has been left behind in the ship.
Right.
Which I think has unexplored consequences for the ending of the book. So that's very unsatisfying to me that we get a second dancing taco this late in the book. Yeah. And then the other thing that's unsatisfying is that the changeling, the chameleon first is this nasty, nasty thing.
Right.
And is set up as sort of the villain / antagonist because he's evil. He just wants to destroy. But the chameleon, who's set up as our likable alien, does horrific damage to people early on in the book. And just kind of like, that just gets washed away as like part of the learning process.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, and we don't dwell on it, and there's no one around as sort of a witness or an observer. We quickly leave those people behind. But that really struck me this time, how awful that is on this reading. Yeah. So
yeah, and that's another thing that we come across from time to time, where in order for our hero to become the hero, they have to have done some really anti-hero stuff that will conveniently just be left behind. It's all good.
We can call that the Uncle Iroh problem.
The Uncle Iroh problem.
Are you familiar with Avatar:
No.
The Last Airbender? So Uncle Iroh is this very, very lovable character in this animated series, and he sort of takes the young firebrand Zuko under his wing and sort of channels him towards a more peaceful, productive relationship that's not hell-bent on war and finding the Avatar and destroying him. However, by the time Uncle Iroh has arrived at this, it's because he's a general in the Fire Army, which has conquered the entire world. Yeah, and he's got just a string of atrocities behind him, but now he's a wise old man who drinks tea.
Right.
So, yeah. So we never see his early life. We just get the wise old man who drinks tea. But come on.
Yeah.
Come on. This guy's a butcher. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the chameleon, I had a problem with there just being the one. And we don't know for a fact that there's just the one. There could be other ones running around. But it spent a lot of time trying to find others unsuccessfully with the sole purpose of, if I find them, I'm going to kill them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, one alien that came to Earth in a spaceship, I got no problem with that. There's a lot of planets out there, only so many aliens to go around.
Yeah.
But something that complex that evolved on the planet, there really should have been more than one.
What I really wanted this to be was that the chameleon was another chunk that went off and rather than becoming a great white shark, became a man and forgot how to do anything else.
You know, that would have been that would have been a much better ending, in fact, than what we got.
Yeah. All right, so now let's talk about the ending.
All right.
So yeah, it ends. It stops.
It stops with nothing resolved. Okay, I can't say nothing because the chameleon has in fact been taken off the playing board.
Yes.
That's literally the only thing. It's not even an answer. I mean, this is Deus Ex Machina at its finest.
Yeah.
You know, this is Medea flying off in the magic air chariot that we've never seen before.
Well, the changeling gets taken off the board. Changeling decides to go home.
Yeah. With the artifact.
With the artifact. And we wrap up the, quote, love story, which we should circle back to, with the lead scientist deciding to go along on the trip. I believe it's been 6 months since I finished reading this. That's what happens, yeah?
Yep, that is what happens.
Yeah, we don't get any explanation of the deeper mysteries. We don't know why they came here in the first place. We don't know what the relationship is between these creatures. And it's like, okay, actually, I have to confess because I'm in love with you, and I'm an alien, and I'm going to leave, but do you want to come? Yeah, sure. Boom, that's the end. It just stops.
Yep. Yep. We don't get to explore any answers.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe he was planning on writing a sequel.
Maybe. I wouldn't be surprised if this book didn't do that well. Even though it's one of my favorites, it's mostly a favorite for the first, I would say, third to half of the book. Yeah.
Now, there's let's jump to the nitpicking part here. Right?
Sure.
So the alien gets caught. The changeling gets caught. And the CIA, and it doesn't go the way they want it to, but they end up blowing its arm off and blowing half its head off. And it runs away because, I mean, that's an inconvenience, but it's not. And it jumps into the ocean, and it does what it always does. It changed into a shark and swam away. And then we get a few chapters of it trying to, well, ultimately successful, becoming a human, finding a way to get a hold of a passport so it can fly back from Samoa to LA. I think it was headed to California for some reason, so it can then reinvent itself with a safer persona and then come back and try and infiltrate the project again. It was in the ocean. It was a shark. We were treated to it crossing the ocean as a shark earlier in the book. It spent 1 million years swimming around as a shark. Why in the world
would it get on a plane?
Would it go through all that effort to become a human, to get back on a plane, to fly back to the mainland?
I don't know. How long does it take a great white shark to swim across the ocean, Samoa to California? It's probably just a matter of days or weeks, right?
Weeks.
Yeah.
You know?
I think there was a sense of urgency. That's part of it.
There was
but
a
you're
sense
right.
of urgency, but because when it got back there, it spent months reinventing itself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Good
I mean,
point.
that's I'm sitting here reading it going, did all the brains get blown out of it? Maybe that's what happened with the shotgun blast? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you gotta nitpick something, and that was a big something to me. It's like, that's a logic hole that you could drive a truck through.
All right, here's my nitpick. This lead scientist, whose name I don't remember, falls in love with this changeling alien twice, and agrees to go with it to wherever. And the thing is that he's only in love with 10% of it. And what happens when that 10% merges with a larger mass?
Well, and as part of the I'm going away with you, he has to get changed. He won't be human anymore. He's going to get modified into something else, something more akin to the changeling. This guy is desperate for love. I mean, okay, so you figured out you were in love with an alien. Maybe you made your peace with that. Another cute girl shows up a few months later, and then in bed her face changes, and you're fine with it. There's no freaking out. There's no adjustment period. You know, it's, oh, it really is you. I'm so glad it really is you. Followed hours later by, yes, I will climb onto a spaceship that I know nothing about. I will be transformed into not human and taken away to something light years away, dozens of light years away, right?
So now I find that part very plausible. There are people on this planet right now, real people who say, yeah, I would gladly take a trip to Mars even if I knew it was a one-way trip.
Jumping through the portal.
Yeah.
Right. That was the thing with my friends growing up. If a portal opened right there, right now, I'm already through it.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. It would just be, even if nothing else, it would have been fun to have a chapter or two exploring the chaos that was left behind.
Yep. Yeah. My other nitpick with this book, it is a double thing related around the human characters, which is one, they're pretty damn thin. These are like the human characters in Dragon's Egg. They're mostly witnesses to what's the interesting stuff that's going on with the aliens. Mm-hmm. They don't have a lot of inner life or complexity. I mean, we get a little bit more involvement with them. I think Haldeman's a little bit better at dialogue than Forward is, but we don't get a lot. And this relationship, which we're supposed to be pinning so much on because it concludes the book. Yeah.
Yep.
Just like, God, I don't care about it. I don't care about it at all.
Yeah, it was actually getting a little bit annoying to me, the fact, and the alien has its own thought process, but it actually thinks at some point to question whether or not it actually has any idea what love is. And I posit that the answer is no, you really don't. This is something that in your extensive, and it's only been a human, started in the 1930s and it takes us up to
For an
2021.
infinitesimal fraction of its life.
Right. So that's 90 years. Okay, I guess that's not a bad run. But this is the first romantic interlude it's really had that actually means romance. It had partnered with people before, but never found love before.
I would say 90 years is long enough to become a human. That's believable. Yeah. But I think it's not enough to counterweight a million or tens of millions, we don't even know, of other life experience, especially when it reintegrates with his larger self.
Yep.
I think the human part is going to be a blip in the ocean. It's like, oh yeah, I remember I was in love with you. Well, on to other things.
Just a shout out, early on, we get a reference to the Sea of Cortez, which is just fun because we read a book about the Sea of Cortez, so that was fun.
Okay, here's the thing. So I found, in addition to the human characters being thin, I found every time it cuts to their attempts to deal with the artifact, just dull. Just dull. There's a little bit of a mystery there, but it wasn't enough of mystery, and it was moving along at a pretty plodding pace. It reminded me a lot of a Michael Crichton book called Sphere. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you read that one.
I have.
Which is in fact, it reminded me so much of that as soon as I finished this, I read Sphere. And Sphere has its own problems, but the mystery and the intrigue of exploring an alien artifact is so much better presented in Sphere than it is here. I found this really unsatisfying in comparison.
I agree. And they glossed over so many things, and some of the tests that they decided to undertake were just absurdly unbelievable.
Yeah.
But it's like, we're going to take this thing to independent Samoa and lease some land from a local family, and we will be safe from all government interference. Really? That's really how you think that's going to play out?
Well, that's
really?
the geopolitical situation of the future. Yeah, so...
Right.
Yeah, I didn't find that plausible either. Yeah.
And then, okay, so we've managed to build a foundation that will hold this thing that we think is made of neutronium. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's unfathomably dense. Okay, we can pour enough concrete to hold it. All right, I'll buy that for a second. Now we're going to build a dome around it that's so intense and yet so flexible that we can create atmospheric conditions from the depths of Jupiter to the vacuum of Pluto, and temperatures from the sun side of Mercury or the depths of Venus to, the absolute cold of space. No, you can't just say these things and expect us to believe they happen.
Yeah.
And even if they did, even if I'm willing to get past that, which is a big ask, like you said, it ends up being boring.
Yeah. It really does. I think the first time I read this, I found it kind of fascinating, but that was 20 years ago. And I've read other things like it that are much, much better. But this time around, this is probably my third or fourth time reading this book. I'm just like, I just sort of hurrying through these chapters of trying harder drill bits, and waiting to rebuild the dome, to reset the conditions. And it's just tedious.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So the other thing that's interesting, they talk about signaling alien intelligences in a way that doesn't depend on a shared language. Okay. And everyone assumes it's going to be a mathematical thing. Like, oh, if we just, I mean, Arthur C. Clarke does this. The monolith from 2001 has the very particular portions of 1 to 4 to 9. Yeah. Which are the squares of the first 3 integers. It's like, oh my God, of course, if someone builds a thing that's 1 to 4 to 9, it means they know what integers are, it means they know what squares are, or they could just go, that's a nice shape for a monolith. Yeah.
They could, and I would think the fact that it beamed a coherent radio signal, through 30 miles of lunar regolith straight at Jupiter when you first discovered it might have been a giveaway it was an alien artifact and not a natural phenomenon.
That for sure. The one they found on the moon, yes.
Yep.
But it's interesting, and I wish I had looked at the reference for this before I came, because I forgot to mention. Let's just look at this note. There was a mathematical conference where someone who worked in SETI designed a message based on mathematical principles that they thought, could be the basis of a thing for contact with alien life. And he gave it to all the people at the conference to see, what they would make of it. No one could figure it the out. We're just like, oh,
love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we overestimate enormously, not we, science fiction authors, the extent to which the initial communication will be mathematical, the extent to which we're able to make any sense of it all. Yeah. So.
Well, I did love the fact that when the artifact finally got tired enough of listening to the repetitions of this signal, it sent its own signal back that was, orders of magnitude more complex. It didn't respond as, okay, I understand A, B, C, here's D, E, F.
Yeah.
No, it's like, I understand A, B, C, here's quantum physics.
Yes.
It's like, oh, my. All right, well, this was an interesting, I enjoyed the read. It definitely had some things that I wish had been resolved differently.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fun book.
So we've pooped on it a bit on some specific aspects of it. I just want to highlight again, this is one of my favorite books. I really enjoy reading it, despite the tedium of the human characters. Yeah. They're barely in the book, except for the ending.
Yeah, I mean, we've got these. I wish if they were going to play with the chameleon, I wish it had come on earlier.
Yes.
Right? Because it's introduced so late in the book, it's obvious there's going to be an antagonistic relation there. We don't get any tension. We know that the only way they can intersect has got to be at the artifact. Whereas if you had them, both developing throughout the course of the book, there could have been, more tension there. Anyway.
Yeah. So very enjoyable book. Haldeman is an amazing author. He writes in a wide variety of styles and genre. I mean, he writes science fiction, but he's just all over the place. Forever War is nothing like this. The Mars trilogy, more like this tonally, but again, nothing like this in terms of content. He's terrific. Read some Haldeman. Yeah, he's good.
Indeed.
So what's up next? Your pick, yes?
It's been too long since we read any Larry Niven, so we are going to do Ringworld.
Ringworld, a classic.
Indeed. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.